Now that we have our iInventory utility interface set up, we need to go back through our code and replace all of the class-based references with the interface reference. And then what we also need to do is we need to create a utility class that'll act as a dependency injector. And what a dependency injector does is it acts as a single point of configuration where we go and we call to it and say we need an object of this type, and that dependency injector's responsibility is then to give us back the appropriate object type. And you'll see how that works as we go through. So basically we're going to create a utility class that goes and fetches the inventory utility for us, and then if we need to change it out from being what it is now where it's hard-coded to being a database inventory utility to maybe later in the future being a web-based inventory utility, we have one place in the code that we need to go and change to make that change happen, and then the rest of the application just gets updated quote-unquote automatically because of that one reference point, and then the rest of the application utilizing these utilities to go and fetch and inject the dependencies where they need to be. All right, so the easiest way to start by replacing the inventory utility, we have two choices. We can either go into the class if you're utilizing the enterprise version of Visual Studio, and you can come up to the very top here where it says two references. If you click on that, it'll actually pop up the two places where the reference to inventory utility exists. You can double click on one of those lines and it'll jump you to that point in the code. If you're not using the enterprise version, you can kind of do it the old-fashioned way. Copy the name, Control F, Control V into the search box, and then you'll want to search the entire solution, and then simply just do a search and find all the references. And as Visual Studio goes through and finds those references, you can go in and replace them. So since we already have our first reference right here, we'll go ahead and change this from inventory utility to iInventory utility. And that's really all that we have to do, because right now our inventory utility implements iInventory utility. Everything was just going to work for us. So let's jump back, and you'll see here our reference is now down to 1. So we'll click it again and we'll jump to this reference. Now, and that reference is actually just referencing the instance. So at this point, we'll go ahead and set up our dependency injector that will then serve up the appropriate inventory utility. So to do that, we'll go back to quickly pos.business, right click, I'm going to do add a class, and I will call this my dependency injector utility. I'm going to make this class public. And now this class will have I'm actually going to go ahead and make this a static, so I don't have to create an instance of it. I just have to call it by name, and then I'll have methods that are also static. So I can just say dependency injector utility dot get inventory utility. So I'm going to create a public static method. It's going to return an iInventory utility type, and it's going to be called get inventory utility. And from here, I'll simply return inventory utility. Actually, I'm going to return a new inventory utility. And that's really it for the dependency injector. There are definitely more sophisticated forms of dependency injectors where you can go through and dynamically find the appropriate class. You could have database lookups and references. You could do a whole lot of work inside of this method if you needed to dynamically identify the dependency injector that's needed. But in our case, we just need one point of reference to where that inventory utility is created, and we'll do the work there manually. You'll see there's lots of different libraries that also suit this purpose. I've dealt with some of them. Some of them have been good. Some of them I could write one just as easily, kind of doing this type of work. But the idea here is that you want to centralize the definition of those interface objects, so that way they're easily interchangeable in your code. So that way if you need to go and replace it with a different version of one, you do it in one place ideally, and then that change gets propagated into the entire application. So this has to do a little bit with that architecture standpoint of making sure that you're building your app so that the dependency injection is managed in one place and not thrown throughout the entire app. So if you make a change, it doesn't require hours and hours of work to replace those components. All right, so now that we have our dependency injection utility in place, we'll come back to this new inventory utility, and we're actually going to delete it. And instead, we'll say dependency injector utility dot get inventory utility. And that is really it. So ideally, everything should work as it did before. I'm going to make one additional change which will help us out in the future. I'm going to go into my inventory utility here, and I'm going to actually hit F2, and I'm going to change its name to be the static inventory utility. And Visual Studio will notice that I made that change to the file. It's going to ask me, do I want to also rename my utility class? And I'm going to say yes. So now my class is called static inventory utility. And if we jump back into the dependency injector, you'll also see that it's also called the static inventory utility. And I'm giving it that name because I statically set all of the utility or all of the products inside of here. So that way when we switch to doing a database utility, we can identify the difference easily and not just get hung up on the fact that they're all called inventory utility. All right, so our dependency injector will return a type of inventory utility. And the reason we can do that successfully is because our static utility also implements inventory utility. And that implementation is simply returning a list of products with a method name called getInventory. And that's what we're doing right now with the static one. So we should be able to go ahead and save that, and we should be able to run our application. And it should function as it did before, because even though we've made a lot of changes under the hood, the general experience of the app has not changed. And that's kind of the goal at this point. We don't want to really change the experience. We want to simply make it so that the app will become more flexible for us in the future. So we have baseball, or basketball, baseball, football, beach ball, and soccer ball, those same static products that we had defined before. And everything appears to be working just the same. And there we go. So our application is now working with dependency injection, utilizing that interface to make things run. And I'm going to actually put a breakpoint here just so we can see real fast the inner mechanics of how this all works. So we'll go add an item, and we're inside of the add item to order form, the load event. So here we call the dependency injection utility. That utility then returns to us. If I mouse over here, you can see this is a quickly pos.business.static inventory utility type, but it's stored inside of an inventory utility. So this is a matter of perspective. This method knows that it's dealing with an inventory utility, but under the hood, inside of that bucket, inside that memory space, there's actually a static inventory utility object that's receiving all of those calls. And because it's implementing the interface, both this code knows that it can call getInventory and get back a list of products, and the static utility that's in the bucket knows how to receive the getInventory call and do that work. So that's how everything kind of works. It's a little bit abstract in that sense, but the goal here is for it to be abstract so that it will work dynamically. So again, we'll go ahead and run that, and then that populates our list box for all of our different products, and we were able to add them successfully. So we've now set up dependency injection in our application. The next step will be for us to go in and actually get our database working. So that'll be fun.